Salam world, I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and Happy New Year! It's the year of the dragon this year, and so to celebrate, thought we'd look at a social commentary from Disney Pixar, Elemental. The movie was directed by a second generation Korean migrant, Peter Son. Looking at the life of a second gen migrant, Ember. Now, Son says that he took a lot of inspiration for the plot of this movie from his life in New York when his parents moved to the US looking for a fresh new start. As a second gen migrant myself, I found a lot of shared feelings and experiences with the main character of Ember. And as I continued to watch, I found that I was understanding her feelings more, but her actions less. I had a lot of unanswered questions by the end of this movie, and I felt like I'd lost the Ember that I could connect to at the end. It was difficult for me to figure out where exactly my dissatisfaction with Ember's character arc came from, but after a few watches, I think I've figured it out. So today, I want to share what that is, but if you're just here for the movie review, click on the time step showing on the screen right now, or the one in the descriptions, whichever suits you best. But now, let's talk story. As you guys may have guessed already, the world of Elemental is made of people from the 4 different elements: water, earth, air, and fire. Bernie and Cinder, a fire couple, were building up their life in Fireland when a storm comes and destroys everything they had. So they decide, for the sake of their unborn baby daughter, that they're going to start a new life in Element City. Now, this decision came with a cost for Bernie. His father never really approved of this decision. He feared that both Bernie and Cinder will lose their fire identity and that their unborn child won't know what it means to be fire. Now, this disapproval ate away at Bernie, and so genuinely his entire life he was trying to maintain his fire values and his beliefs. In Element City, it was really hard as well for Bernie and Cinder to find a home. First of all, water puts out fire, so they don't get along, and then fire also boils water and can burn earth. So, there was a lot of division just because of that. But eventually they do find this rundown building and they make it their home. And this is where Ember is born. Now, Bernie opens up a fire goods shop on the lower level of their home. And Ember grows up in this environment, installed with the values of hard work, perseverance, service, and as well as a bit of prejudice, particularly towards the element type which can hurt her, water. This isn't exactly Ember's fault. One thing is that her parents were trying to protect her for their own safety, so of course they would encourage her to avoid water, but also for the sake of the other water people, because she could boil them. As well as the fire people that she did meet in her childhood, they weren't exactly the best examples. And as a consequence, she built up this image of them. Eventually, the area where their shop is started to grow and grow, and it eventually became Firetown, with many fire migrants settling in the same location. And Ember is so proud of her fire culture, her religion, and more importantly, her family. She's so willing to, help her father, and she saw that as he was getting older, it was becoming more difficult for him to run the shop, and she was just relishing the day that she could take that burden away from him and, make him proud by showing him that everything that his he has built will survive. And she genuinely just enjoyed making her parents happy. But Ember has one character trait that she needs to work on: her patience. And I was kind of happy to see that the protagonist had a goal and had a character flaw. She wants to take over her father's shop, but her patience is standing in the way for her to, truly be able to achieve this. Her father sees how eager Ember is in wanting to take over the shop and makes the assumption that that's what she wants with her life. And so he gives her the opportunity to run the shop while he is taking pretty much a day off. And if she does well, then he's willing to give her the shop. And now this doesn't come from the fact that, Bernie doesn't trust Ember or anything, but it comes from this kind of fatherly love. He doesn't want to burden Ember with anything which could be difficult. Being a small business owner is not easy and it comes with a lot of stresses, and he doesn't want to put that on his daughter too early or when she's not ready for it. But at the same time, he wants to kind of give her that confidence that he believes she will be able to achieve her dream of taking over the shop if she really wants to. And I mean, forgive us as an audience and Bernie for thinking that she wants to take over the shop, because so far in the movie, that's all she's talked about. I don't know, it just kind of feels like the most logical conclusion. And I'm like, sorry for harping on about this point, but it is super important later on in the movie. And it annoys me that they've kind of like set us up to think, oh, this is all she wants, and then they completely will get there. So when it came to Amber actually running the shop, her lack of patience gets to her and she completely loses her temper and literally blows the pipes. And this is not good because, yeah, one, it affects the building's entire structural integrity, but the pipes start leaking quite bad. And that's where Ember meets Wade, a highly emotional, lost in purpose water city inspector who identifies 30 different problems with her father's shop and reports them to the city council. Lovely guy. But that's where the adventure starts. Touched by Ember's life story, Wade decides that he'll help her clear all the citations of her father's shop, as well as, get life back to somewhat normal. But of course, life won't go back to normal, and that's how we like things, right? It's called progress. Well, it turns out that water is not even meant to be in Firetown, so there is a bigger problem than just leaks in her father's shop. And so Ember and Wade become these duo of detectives trying to find the source of the water leak. And it's so cool because, like, with Ember's creativity and marvelous problem solving skills, and then Wade's knowledge of Element City and all the kind of policies and regulations, they make a really good team. So far in the story, but there is always a but. Whilst Ember was opening up to Wade about her personal struggles of not only just being a fire element, but her lack of patience, Wade mistakenly confuses temper for anger and so plants a dangerous thought into Ember's head. What is it? There is something wrong with your life, and you're a victim. Now, his statement was innocent enough.
I don't think a temper is so bad. Sometimes when I lose my temper, I think it's just me trying to tell me something I'm not ready to hear.
And he probably didn't mean for it to be a cause of this giant doubt spiral in Ember's head. But this one comment opened the door for Ember to justify her temper, which is her character flaw and something she needs to work on for herself. And just to clear up definitions, temper is a character trait which describes your tolerance level, whereas anger is a emotion which arises from a particular situation. So Wade's comment would make perfectly sense if it was referring to anger. But Ember is not angry. she's got a bad temper. Now at this point, Ember chooses to ignore the comment that Wade made, but we'll see that that one statement will continue to grow in Ember's head until she starts justifying her temperament and starts to blame others for it, which is wrong. You shouldn't blame others for your own flaws. Back to the story now. So they end up finding a temporary solution for the water leak and they start seeing each other. Now, Wade is really cute and sweet. He really tries hard to make Ember feel comfortable and welcome and loved. I mean, something that she really hasn't seen from the outside world. And this isn't to say that, the world is hostile to fire people all the time. No, but an immigrant will never really 100% feel comfortable with their surroundings, especially when their core values and points of view differ from those of the people around them. And now that's just the logical outcome of immigration. Genetically and within your family and household, you're going to hold particular ideas and thoughts to heart, which won't be shared by the people around you. So it's not so much a matter of prejudice or cultural pride, although it can definitely be. I'm not saying that it's not. There are people who are like that in the world. Um, but it's more like those extra steps that someone has to take to transition smoothly between preserving their own identity and protecting others from the harm which may be caused due to cultural misunderstandings. There is no such thing as a perfect culture. Every culture has its beauties and also its toxic traits. And so there are people who just don't see the toxicity within their own culture, and so they start casting it without really knowing to either people within their culture or outside their culture. But then you've got other people who are like hyper aware of the toxic traits of their culture, and so when they're with people of their culture, they have learned to kind of build up shields to deal with those toxic traits. But then when they're with people outside that culture, they try hard to hide those toxic traits and protect those people from them. And Ember is in that second boat of people. Like, we can see that she carries an umbrella to protect herself from water, but at the same time, she does everything in her power to stay away from people of earth and water so that she doesn't hurt them. This is genuinely a second nature for many people that have grown in a different cultural landscape than the one they grew up with. And that's the beauty of humanity. Even though we don't know one another, we try everything in our power to protect each other from our own personal toxic traits, whether that be cultural demons or not. I mean, there is no perfect human being, and so being self-aware and selfless is what really makes you a good member of society at large. And Wade was reciprocating to Ember. It was the first time that somebody had done that for her. Instead of being the only one doing all the sponging, protecting, and hiding for herself, someone else was shouldering that burden and allowing her to experience the beauty of this diverse world they're in without the prejudice. And look, that's not to say that the fire people in her life weren't doing that for her. But generally speaking, when it comes to two people of the same culture, they're pretty much facing very similar adversaries. And so when one comes to protect the other, it's seen more of an act of solidarity and a shared experience rather than one, to be touched by. And that's kind of how most migrants or people with shared cultures and experiences see it. People who we share things with, we see as siblings. And so we're here looking out for each other. But within the cultural community, you're not really seen as anything other than that, unless you do something which would be considered as a form of internal protection within the culture against the kind of cultural toxicities, if you like. And only then will these two individuals foster a relationship like Ember and Wade's. When it's someone from a different culture, they're genuinely trying to get to know you through something which you're associated with, and they're going out of their own way to help you out. And that is a personal act, and therefore it's much easier for the heart to measure. And so I don't blame Ember when she starts to fall for Wade. And at the same time, Ember was filling a gap that Wade had in his heart ever since his father's passing. I mean, the shock that Wade must have had to the system after this tragic event had left him lost, aimless, and purposeless. And so meeting someone with such strong convictions inspired him in some way. Kind of wish that Wade had used that inspiration from Ember to clean up his own act and find a purpose from himself. But I mean, instead, Ember became his new purpose, and he just wanted to live for her. It was just like super romantic, but really impractical. I mean, I'm not one to speak about relationships. What I know is that generally each individual has their own purpose, and then when you find that someone, they're supporting you in yours, and you're supporting them in theirs. And so you complement each other and work together in your goals respectively, but then form a new shared goal together. Now, this is where I start having issues with the story. Fire culture stipulates that the elements cannot mix, which arises from the culture's self-awareness of fire nature. The rule aims to protect other elements, especially water and earth, from the nature of fire. But instead, it's posed as the close-mindedness of the fire people.
Ooh.
Look, cultures are based on facts, whether you like it or not. And even though a particular individual doesn't understand where a cultural kind of rule or norm has come from, it's still really difficult to ignore because deep inside you know that there is some kind of truth to it. And so no matter how many times Ember keeps telling Wade that they cannot touch, he keeps insisting until Ember caves in. So essentially, he's encouraging rebellious behavior without a right cause or thought to go behind it. I mean, breaking down cultural norms requires a really good reason. Like, for example, if a particular norm does more harm than good, or if the dynamics of the new world have pretty much rendered a rule irrelevant, etc. But none of these concepts are even considered or mentioned in the story, which is kind of missing a huge chunk of the puzzle, particularly when it comes to trying to solve cultural illiteracy. In addition, Wade never really supports Ember of making her dream come true, of making her father work free, because that's essentially her dream. Instead, he continues to kind of reiterate, oh, how difficult and how burdenous it must be. You know, till Ember met Wade, she never really saw taking over the shop as a burden. It was the only thing in her head. Instead, she understood her weaknesses and she wanted to work on them so she'll be able to achieve that goal. So why did Ember's thinking about the shop change all of a sudden, and where did all this negativity come from?
Wade and his family.
And instead of me trying to explain it to you, I'm just gonna show you. So here's a clip of what Ember says.
This shop is my dad's dream. If I'm the reason it gets shut down, it will kill him.
Oh,
And now this is how Wade translates it.
her dad will be
Nope. No.
super disappointed in her.
Stop it!
He might even be ashamed.
What are you doing?
But the main thing is, if her father can't retire, it will be all Ember's.
Stop talking!
Essentially, Wade is villainizing Ember's father to plead Ember's case. Or, in other words, he's teaching her that
If she wants to get things done her own way, she needs to shift the blame on somebody else and victimize herself.
Now, Ember is still strong at this point, still holding on to the responsibilities that have come as a consequence of her own actions and shortcomings. But then Wade speaks to her again, and he sparks a second seed of doubt in Ember's mind.
Maybe your dad will understand.
Now, where did this come from? Ember and Bernie have a really good relationship, and we've never really seen any problems arising because of them. However, we have seen one strained relationship.
Bernie and Wade.
Fueled with the lies given to Bernie and the prejudices that he already has towards water people because of his past experiences, as well as the fear of losing his identity, Bernie bans Wade from the shop. Now, was this a hasty decision? Yes. Was it a mistake? Well, not necessarily, particularly from Bernie's perspective. But from Wade's point of view, I mean, all he was doing is trying to save his girlfriend and, by extension, the shop of her father. And what does he get? A thanks? No. Gratitude? Anything? He just gets mocked, challenged, and banned. And because Wade can't really understand where Bernie's coming from, particularly the cultural side, it can only really be explained as Bernie's personality. Because the only other fire girl that he knows, Ember, doesn't treat him in that particular way. So instead of attributing it to a particular experience or culture, he attributes it to Bernie's personality. And so comes.
I'm serious. Look, I know it can be tough. I mean, with my dad, we were like oil and water. I never got a chance to fix that. But you guys are different. It might be time to tell him.
Now, I also want to stress that Wade's conclusion isn't wrong, but it was made in haste as well. Just like Bernie made a decision in haste, Wade made a decision in haste. If he didn't jump into the assumption that Bernie was a ununderstanding and unreasonable man, then he wouldn't have made the comparison between Bernie and Ember's relationship with his and his father's. And by extension, he wouldn't have responded with,
No, you're doing your best.
when Ember was putting herself down. Because by doing so, he's reiterating that there are unreasonable expectations and standards being thrust on Ember's shoulders when there really aren't. Instead, what's really happening is Ember is feeling guilty and remorseful for the consequences of her not being able to control her temper and how these consequences have affected the people that she loves, her parents. Now, from a cinematic point of view, it's really interesting that the writers decided to show the sun dipping behind the water just before Ember says,
Maybe you're right when you said my temper is me trying to tell me something.
are they implying that her fire is being watered down and consequently she is starting to justify her own temper as something out of her personal control or potentially an external trigger? But of course, we'll just gloss over that terrifying transition in Ember's thinking and not even bat an eyelid. Lying is going to lead to misunderstanding between you and the person that you've lied to, aka in this situation, the parents. And so when Bernie tells Ember that he's so proud of her for prioritizing the shop and she doesn't agree, well, it's probably because her father doesn't even know that she is in a relationship and that she's prioritizing that. If she had said that, it would have been different. So yeah, I do feel bad for Bernie. I mean, he's left in the dark for most of the movie. He's made out to be this ignorant bad guy and forced to make additional sacrifices when in fact all he's been doing this entire time is loving and looking out for his daughter Ember.
Oh, now we get to Wade's family.
When talking about cultural illiteracy, like this is
Literally the definition.
it was actually really funny watching this because this is how it feels like when you go into your friend's house and they're from a different culture. It's so cute. Now, something that you guys should know first is what Wade's family did. This isn't offensive or hurtful at all. It was actually really sweet because they were genuinely curious and trying to connect with Ember, and it felt welcoming. Now, I would say that there is one negative thing which happened in the Wade household, and that's when Wade's mother offers Ember a internship. You see, Ember hasn't really shown interest so far of pursuing glass making as a career. Yes, she's talented and maybe more than the average fire person, who knows? But it was Wade and his family which drew her attention to the fact that this could be a future. At this point of her life, Ember knows what she wants. She wants to look after her parents and make sure that they're happy and looked after and that their legacy lives on. And in kind of Ember's not yet fully matured mind, that looked like taking over the shop. She doesn't really know of any other alternative to this. I mean, I hope for Ember's sake that when she grows, she realizes that the legacy of her parents and making them happy doesn't revolve around her taking over the shop, and that she genuinely could consider glasswork as a career path if she really was interested enough to pursue it. But offering the internship straight away, it doesn't even give her time to think about it as a future. And I think only warrants the response that they got, to be honest.
I'm going home!
Because, number one, she hasn't had the time to process any of this new information that she's just received. And number two, she hasn't even thought about what that would mean for her parents. I mean, for someone who only wants happiness for her parents, that is something that she will definitely factor in when making that decision. And then finally, does she even want to commit to glass making? Because I mean, just because you're good at something, it doesn't mean that you enjoy it and want to make a future out of it. And that's really important for Ember to kind of sit down with herself and make that decision. Look, at the end of the day, when someone receives personal insight, they do need time to process it. And so a hasty decision could end up ruining things again. And then he goes and does it again in front of all the fire people.
We touched. And when we did, something happened to us. Something impossible.
Wait, no time to think, no time to process, no time to consult the people that she cares about. He's just gonna sit down and air out all her dirty laundry to the world. And for what? Just so he gets the girl. And so this is what I really dislike about the ending. I mean, after all that Wade has done, he gets his way. He gets the girl, they move in together, she follows the dream that he's given her, and now she's completely dependent on him for anything that happens because, wait, she hasn't dealt with her primary issue, which is her temper, and oh, there's no one there to help her except for him now because they're moving away. And who's gonna make all the sacrifices for Wade's dream? Ah, Bernie and Cinder again. And poor Ember, man, she went from being told that she's a victim to actually becoming a victim herself. Like, and you're probably thinking, oh wait, what is she a victim of? Her ego. You see, before, her goals were external to herself. Her ego was suppressed, and she found joy in the pleasure of others. And because the ego wasn't in the way, she was able to measure herself and genuinely figure out what her weak points are so that she could work on them. But slowly, we see her being influenced, and our ego, it relishes on excuses so that it can do what it wants. So when someone on the outside ends up giving you an excuse for yourself, your ego's gonna be like, we're holding on to that, and it just goes stronger and stronger, and it becomes more difficult to fight it off. Consequently, your thinking becomes more self-centered, and your flaws become the result of the ill treatment towards your ego, and everything is somebody else's fault all of a sudden, and unfortunately, Ember falls victim to this trap. And so her ego takes hold of her, and we're kept wondering what will happen to her and her parents. Yeah, it's a really unsettling ending, to be honest, and one keeps looking back and wondering where it all started. Where did it all go wrong? Because Wade and Ember, they're a sweet couple, and I genuinely wish the best for them. I want them to be together. But it was the misunderstanding derived from their different life experiences which ultimately caused the problem in Ember's thinking. Which begs the question, why was Ember so influenced? And this is the crux of it all. Ember's heart was split by two different sides, which she believed would never see eye to eye. So she shouldered the responsibility of keeping each side happy and protected. And when she saw that neither side was happy and neither side was protected, she reflected that on herself as having failed. And in a fragile state, a person is more susceptible to influence. And anyone who isn't fully adjusted or is constantly changing their environment, like an immigrant as shown by this movie, or an even more extreme example, like a child in the system, they're automatically prone to that more fragile state of mind at the get-go. And so the smallest event can tip the scale and make them more susceptible. This isn't what the movie highlights, and it doesn't even resolve it. We don't see Ember's kind of train of thought to that point of clarity where she decides to make that particular decision. Instead, it was easier for everyone to blame someone else for the problem, and so never work on strengthening one's mind. And so, because we don't actually see Ember reaching that place on her own of wanting to make glass, not wanting to look after the shop, we don't see a happy resolution between Bernie and Wade, and we don't really see them coming up with a solution to the entire retirement situation. We're not convinced that anything was solved, really. And so we as an audience are left unsatisfied. This movie is definitely a good concept and does tackle a really big topic, but whenever we shift the blame for our own faults to someone else, we'll never really get a true character arc, and so we'll never really get a happy ending. Instead, it perpetuates the message that the world is trying to push us down and that the only way of surviving is by thinking about yourself. Which is a message I do not like, because the values of Ember's parents of sacrifice, hard work, and persistence for the sake of what you truly care about in the world is the real takeaway message of this movie. But unfortunately, fire does get watered down. So, do I recommend this movie for kids? Well, yes and no. I don't think this movie should be taken on face value, but instead should be used as a platform to open up conversations between parents and children about purpose, worth, and shared values. It's a good way for the first generation immigrants to understand the struggles of the second generation in hopes that no family would fall into the trap of acting with haste without any kind of communication, which would ultimately lead to misunderstandings, distrust, and secrets. Both parents and children are entitled to their privacy, but if something will affect the other's life, open communication is key. And compassion and understanding needs to be in the forefront of this conversation. This movie is a beautifully simple analogy for the complexity of life, appropriate for families to explore deeper conversations concerning each family's personal convictions. At the end, the usefulness of this movie comes out of the productive conversation which it can open up. So that was Elemental. Cute at times, toxic in others. If you want to review the content of this movie yourself, please stream it on a platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights or the spread of negativity in the world. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss out on next week's drop. And for now, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.